We could just change one of the words into something goofy, put a pun in there, and then we're done.
Oh God! Can we not turn it into the pun podcast, please? I'm not really a pun person, so we'll live without that. Okay, hello listeners, and welcome to episode 50 of the Picky Bastards podcast. Somehow we have got to half a century without killing each other. Although I was thinking that we've lost two full-time hosts in that time, so arguably there's a possibility that there has been some murder involved. Who knows? But anyway, I'm here with the current hosts. I'm Fran, if you didn't know that, and I'm here with Matt. How you doing, Matt?
Hello.
And Sam. You didn't really answer my question, did you? You just said hello.
I was just going to say you're the one who's done 50.
I am. Well, I haven't really done 50 technically, so maybe we should save the special because I had a few off, didn't I?
Oh yeah, I forgot about that.
I think I'm technically on. I think I missed two, so technically I'm on episode 48. So none of us have actually made it to episode 50 yet, but the podcast has, and that's the main thing.
Yeah.
Anyway,
yeah.
How are you, Sam? Seems Matt interrupted you.
I'm good.
Sorry.
I don't even know how many I've been on. It's nowhere near as many as you guys.
Yeah, it'd be hard to say how many you've been on. I wonder if you've overtaken Nirmal now, because Nirmal was the original host. He did 7 episodes.
I think I've done more than that.
So I think you probably have overtaken. So you're probably the 4th most decorated bastard now.
Wow.
Anyway, instead of clocking up how many episodes we've all done, let's talk about the actual podcast. Today we're going to do a special episode looking at albums that we haven't covered that we probably should have from the 5 years that we've been doing the podcast. So we picked a mix of albums that we really like and wanted to share with each other and talk about, and albums that have been either quite big or quite critically acclaimed that we've just never really spoken about. So we've got a list of 9 albums and we're going to do some round robin questions around them. So the 9 albums are Lizzo with 'Cause I Love You, Rosalia with El Maquira, and that's my amazing Spanish, Cardi B with Invasion of Privacy, Nilufer Yanya with Miss Universe, Live Forever by Bartees Strange, Uye, or something like that, by Ibibio Sound Machine. Someone please tell me how to pronounce it. Pang by Polachek. I think that these lot just chose albums that they knew I would struggle to pronounce as we started it. This is a nice easy one. 444 by Jay-Z, although it could be 444, who knows. And Ash by Ibeyi. And that's our 9 albums. So I decided after the last time, I'm going to just tell you before we start the round robin what the 4 questions are, because a lot of the time, if we are going to talk about an album later, we won't talk about it at the end of each question. One of us might say, I can't talk about that now. And I just wonder if that makes any sense to you listening sometimes. So we have 4 questions. If an album comes up, we won't talk about it. So the 4 questions are going to be, what was the most typical Picky Bastards album and why? What was our favourite new discovery? Which of these albums felt most relevant to the 5 years we've been doing the podcast? And which of these albums do we wish we still hadn't covered? And we'll each give an answer for those. So I'm going to kick off with the first question, which we'll get 90 seconds to answer each. And Sam, I'm going to start with you. So okay. Sam, which was the most typical Picky Bastards album and why?
Yeah, so I thought this was a really easy question to answer. I think the most typical Picky Bastards album possible, a genre-fusing blend of indie rock, hip-hop, jazz, made by an English-born American. It's pure Picky Bastards. It's the Bartees Strange, Live Forever. I'd be surprised if anyone picks anything else, but judging by that reaction, you probably won't. Fallen for You is like heartbreakingly stark and it's like really brutal, while there's other tracks like Mustang that are like raucous and full of energy. Free Kelly Rowland is like super commercial trap music. Then it's like back to like indie grungy rock. It's so hard to pin down, but it's really, really intriguing as an album. There's this like eerie noise across Flagy God. It's like so thrilling. That track could be like house music. I could hear that alongside a dance track and not be surprised. And then like Boomer has this big energy, like this driving guitar line before it all goes off. I feel like it's just a constant development from moment to moment that's so interesting. He does all of these styles on this album, and it feels like in other person's kind of record, it could fall apart. and yet he sounds really great on all of them. So it's really impressive. I think it's a really interesting album, and it is so picky bastards. It hurts.
Nice, is that you?
Yeah, that's me.
You did it. That's the first time you've ever beaten the clock.
I know.
Think. You had like 3 seconds left. I'm impressed. All right then, Matt. We'll see if you have picked the same. What is the most typical Picky Bastards album and why? Go.
I've picked Bartees Strange with Live Forever. And it's for a lot of the same reasons. I think it, like, the core, for me, the core genre in this is like the indie rock, which we do lean towards, I think, as a group. But then it has a bunch of other stuff mixed in that keeps it interesting, keeps it spicy, and makes you like kind of gives you enough to like dig into over a month when we're doing this. So it definitely feels like the appropriate pick from this list. That said, despite that description, I'm not so sure. Like, listening to this album, I was like on the fence. Do I like this? Do I not like this? And I think what it came down to for me was it has so much of these diverse sounds that it wasn't super cohesive as an album for me. Like he is pretty, his sound is pretty unique and is coherent throughout the album, but the changing of styles and genres is just a little bit too abrupt for me when listening to the album. That said, there's some absolutely great tracks on it. Mustang, Boomer, In a Cab, those are like the more indie rock ones that I really liked. But then also some of the weirder electronic ones like Flaky God, I also really liked.
I was looking forward to seeing everyone pronounce that. Sorry, carry on.
Yeah. I think the biggest thing for me that actually held me back, though, actually was the production. It felt really kind of lightweight almost.
Well, that's all you're going to get to say about that.
Yeah.
Okay. Who wants to... Sam, you're timing me, aren't me?
I'll time you.
Yeah.
You ready to go?
I am.
On front. Go.
So I think there's more often than not, there's a particular place where us bastards land as reviewers. I think we like to pretend we're into really interesting experimental music that's doing new things, but often we end up loving stuff that kind of pushes less boundaries, the stuff that kind of hints at being a bit new and original, but then falls back on a lot of safe elements. So for me personally, I think Nilufer Yanya's Miss Universe is probably the most typical Picky Bastards album you could get. If not, not just the most typical on this list, it's the most typical you could get. I think the hype and reception to this album suggested it was something really game-changing and original, but I've never really understood that perspective personally. I think it's quite a generic indie pop album in a lot of ways, but I don't mean that as an insult. Like, it's the most typical Picky Bastards album because this is a sound a lot of us like. And I do really like this album. I think it's full of great sort of indie pop songs being performed by a really good indie pop performer. I think that, there's hints at experimentalism, but they don't dominate the songs and they fit in well. I think songs like Tears, Heavyweight Champion, In Your Head and Baby Blue are all great. And I particularly love Safety Net. I think it's just got a great melody. It's up the top half of this list for me, maybe my fourth favourite album, I think. But I will end by being a bit less positive because I have to, because I'm a negative person.
Mm-hmm.
I do think this album is slightly overrated. I think it's very good, but I think it's been treated as this masterpiece from a lot of the reviews and a lot of the hype that I've heard. I don't think it is that, but I do think that she could create a masterpiece in the future. So I'm interested to see.
Sorry,
I've nearly done.
Stop that. Sorry, I couldn't work out how to actually stop the alarm.
Well, that's so. Cool. We didn't all pick Bartees Strange.
No.
And I can't talk about Bartees Strange now because I'm going to come back to that. So do either of you want to talk about Nilufer Yanya right now?
I can.
Go for it.
Well, I suggested this because I do love this album. I do agree it isn't perfect. It's definitely like very front loaded and tails off towards the end. I think the kind of health motifs throughout are hit and miss. It's a cool idea, but I do think it was very much like at the time this album was made, Black Mirror was at its like peak of popularity.
Yeah, that makes sense.
And so yeah, it feels like of a moment. But yeah, for like a debut album, I think this was fantastic. And I remember I wrote about it for when we were talking about the Mercury Prize, and it wasn't nominated. And I think it should have been, because there were albums on that list like 1975. There was the Anna Calvi album, which was good, but also not great. and I think the Foles album as well was that year.
That was a good Foles album, though. That was a good Foles album.
It was, but it's also like their 5th album, and that shouldn't be a completely deciding factor, but it should be a factor, I think.
Yeah.
So yeah, and like, yeah, she's also just really great live, as you would imagine. Like with this indie rock vibe and her like really raspy voice, it all carries across to a live setting really, really well.
Great.
So yeah.
So yeah, I didn't want to sound negative about it. I do think it's a very good album, but it's one of the ones on this list that I personally already knew quite well. So I think, and I've seen so many people absolutely rave about it, which I've always found a little bit. Sometimes I think she's a really interesting artist, and I think that she will do something fantastic. I've heard the new single's really good, so I'm excited to see her album this year. But I just think people get a bit carried away with themselves about this album. That's all I'm saying. Sam, you want to talk now, or
I'll talk about that later.
Okay, cool.
Okay.
So on to question 2, which is, what is your favourite new discovery? And Matt, we're going to start with you this time. Are you ready?
Yeah.
Go.
So for the favourite new discovery, I have picked Jay-Z's 444, which sounds super counterintuitive because I've talked about Jay-Z on a Why I Love, but I thought I'd listen to this album, and I hadn't. And I was looking back,
You're a
and
mess.
I know why, because this was released, I'm pretty sure, on Tidal, and then it was eventually came across to Spotify, and I completely there's a whole several albums I missed from Jay-Z as a result of his Tidal obsession, and checking back into them, I have checked back into some of them, but coming back to this, it feels like, after really only listening to his more recent stuff, which is more like poppy, his stuff working with stuff like Kanye, and so coming back to this album where it's so much more mature, it's so much more like a step up and a growth. I loved him as an artist, but had kind of felt like I'd grown out of him, and it feels like this with this album where it's like talking about values that now I more appreciate, like open, like the honesty that he in his storytelling, and family and community, which is more the center of the album.
That's all you got to say, I'm afraid.
Yeah.
You just picked one of your favourite artists as your favourite new discovery, so
wow.
I don't think you should have even been allowed 90 seconds.
It's an album, and it's an album.
Fair enough. An
album.
All right, I'm going to go next. So when you're ready, Sam.
You ready to go? Go now.
Okay, so the Bartees Strange album, Live Forever, is not only my favourite new discovery on this list, but it's probably the best album I've discovered through Picky Bastards in a long time. Maybe since sort of Kano's Hoodies All Summer or Squid's Bright Green Field. I love everything about this album. I think he has an incredible voice with a really interesting and dynamic range. I love the mix of influences on show that you've both mentioned already. There's songs that are very soulful, songs that are influenced, songs with elements of R&B and pop, and he even has a rapper guest on one of the songs. I think it's a really varied and changeable album, but I disagree with Matt. I think it does feel like a really cohesive whole as well. And I think it's his presence and his persona that makes it feel so complete. I think he stands out so much in the music. So whatever the style, the music feels completely him. I think that makes him quite unique. And as well as the album being my favourite Picky B's discovery in quite a long time, I really can't think of a song I've loved as much as Flagy God on one of our playlists in years. I think Selfish by Little Sims is probably the last song that I've got so obsessed with through the podcast. I think this song brings together all of the influences that we've been talking about, and it's just so addictive and so fun. And I think it's the song that really shows what he's all about. So yeah, I'm a huge fan of this, and I can really see he's been a really sort of cult artist so far, and I think I can really see what the fuss has been about, and I think he's really one we should have covered much earlier. I'm done.
Cool.
I beat the clock.
You just beat the clock.
Amazing.
Good job.
I'm very skilled at this. After 5 years of doing it, I should be able to beat the clock by now. All right, Sam, when you're ready, your new discovery, go.
Yeah, so I've gone for Ibibio Sound Machine.
Okay.
as this album just makes me feel good. I can't describe it any better than that, really. It's just so stacked with like grooves and rhythm and soulful performances from both the instruments and the kind of the band and then the vocals. That no album that I didn't already know on this list made me wish I could see this being performed live like this did. I bet that it's just such an energy on stage, and you get that throughout the whole album. Like the pot is on fire, that's just pure joy. Power of three, that makes me need to dance. It's not like I want to. It's like you can't help it, and that's the energy that this whole album seems to capture. And I love the kind of crossover of styles. It feels very like kind of a cultural hot pot of various different things, all in one. I really like the songs where it kind of switches between languages, and I'd listened to their follow-up album, but had never really given it the time I needed. I'm so glad that this was picked for this, because this was way more immediate to me. And I feel like now I'm like in it, and now I'd probably go back to any of their albums and be like, yeah, I'm gonna feel great listening to this.
Perfect timing. Okay, well, I'm going to just jump on with Ibibio, I think, because it kind of leaves off where Sam was in a way. I was really surprised by how much this one grew on me. I think on paper, and after the first few listens, it really seemed like it wasn't the kind of album that would impact me much. But I think it started to seep in when I listened to it in different contexts, when I wasn't just having it on in the background while I was working. There's just something incredibly infectious and irresistible about it. You all know, Sam just talked about it making him want to dance. You all know that I avoid dancing as much as I possibly can. But you can't not dance to this album. There is no way that you can listen to this album and not dance in some way. There's no way you can stay still. I think what separates it from me from some of the other stuff on this playlist that's largely not in English is that I didn't care what they were saying as much on this album as well. It's rare for me that lyrics don't really impact the experience. And I'm not saying there's a problem with the lyrics here, but for me, the voice and the words are more important for the rhythm that they create on this. I think they make the rhythm, the words make it really hypnotic. And I think the repetition and rhythm are the sort of key elements of this album, the things that make it so addictive. So I ended up loving it. And it's really only grown on me, particularly in the last week of listening. I think this is what made it interesting to me is it's the kind of album, every week I listen to 4 or 5 new releases, and if they don't get me on the first listen, I never listen to them again. And I probably wouldn't have listened to this if it wasn't for the context of the podcast. So I would have decided it wasn't for me very early. So I'm really glad that it got included here, because it probably ended up being it would have been my next choice for favorite discovery, actually. It's probably my 3rd favorite album on the list. So yeah, I really liked it. Matt, can you talk about Ibibio now?
Yeah. I also very much enjoyed this album. It was also a contender for this category for me. I think it hits a lot of the things that probably folks know that I love, like the kind of 80s synths, the danceability, and the mixing it. But it has this kind of really front and center is like the Afro beats and things like that. It's much more leaning that direction than compared to stuff that I more overtly listen to, like Talking Heads or something, or LCD Sound System. But I don't mean that in a negative. It's really fun and different, and like Sam said, it's this kind of cultural like melting of all these other sounds coming together, and it just, like, for 95% of this album, it works super well. Like, I don't know of any song apart from, I can't remember which song it's on here, that has like a 20-second breakdown with like laser noises, and it works.
Yeah.
But it did, like, it's interesting. I'm going to talk about the lyrics now, which is a complete flip of the usual.
What's happening?
I got really curious about like what she was talking about, and okay. I don't really know. Like, I don't know. I didn't get that far into my research, but I just was reading an article. I was reading.
So you're not really going to talk about the lyrics. You're going to talk about briefly thinking about the lyrics.
Like, reading around some of the reviews of people that can speak the language. I think she's speaking a language of a Nigerian language.
Okay.
like apparently storytelling is one of her strong points.
Oh, really? Wow, that's interesting.
And so, like, there's this whole extra level that we're missing out on, and we love it. I feel like we all are very positive about it, right? And there's this whole other level, and apparently, some of these lyrics are about like war and all the struggles and shit of like some of the experiences growing up in Nigeria.
That's really interesting.
The juxtaposition of that against the euphoria of the music would be super interesting if I understood it. But that's my own fault. So
that's interesting though, because I suppose I would have assumed it was an album about dancing and
celebration.
Yeah, so that does make it even more interesting. Yeah, I might have to read around about that. Cool. Okay,
that's cool.
Anything more on Ibibio before we move on to?
No.
Sam, can you talk about Jay-Z at the minute?
Yeah, I can talk about this. I picked this because basically I was in the same position that Matt was in when this came out. So I was kind of a huge lifelong Jay-Z fan. Love so much of so many of his records. But he had kind of become a singles act. Like feel like post Run This Town, Empire State of Mind, he was chasing hits and trends, and it felt like those albums, they had hits on them and they're great songs, but he wasn't creating bodies of work like the Black Album or the Blueprint. He wasn't doing that level of album, and then this completely changed that for me. I feel like it works even better in the context of this coming out a year after Lemonade, because you're talking about this relationship that all of us know of, but we barely knew anything about them. They were so guarded, like in the press and in interviews. They would never talk about anything serious, really. And then we have these two albums which dive so deep into that. So like the title track is just so brutally honest, and it's really powerful. And I saw them live together. Like they did a tour when they had that joint album, and they did this performance and they mixed like one of Beyonce's songs with this 444, and he's like circling her, rapping that song, and it was really like moving, really, because it was like these two people who talking about losing a child to miscarriage, Jay-Z blaming himself for the infidelity that he was doing and kind of taking ownership of that. It's so mature and honest. Things like the story of OJ and Moonlight. He's describing like being Black in America, and he's so open and frank from his position as this kind of businessman, which he'd kind of turned into rather than a person at the center of hip hop. And this brings him back there. But this isn't a like completely serious album all the time. Like there's really fun songs and really enjoyable moments that are like brighter. Like that, I love that song "Smile" that he talking about his mother, and the fact that realizing that his mother's a lesbian and that she's been living this lie this whole time, and that how hard that must have been, and how he didn't support her enough, and yet how happy he is that she can finally be who she is. And that's like, I can't think of like an established kind of old school hip hop act like Jay-Z releasing an album like this so far into their career and it being matching, if not surpassing, some of their classics. Like to me, this is one of his classics, and that's why I wanted to do it on the podcast, because I feel like even people that maybe see him as kind of past it, this is just a complete reset. And whatever he does from now on his studio albums, the standard is back again. It's back to that quality. So I'm really glad you finally listened to it, Matt, because I feel like as a fan, this is one of his best, definitely.
Yeah. I think you pretty much, in a much more eloquently way, said exactly how I was feeling. I was kind of blown away by how strong it was, and that's why even though I know Jay-Z very well, I had to put it in this section. It just made sense.
Fair enough. Okay, so
can you not talk about it, Fran?
I can't right now, no. But I will be doing relatively soon. So we've spoken about the Bartees Strange. So that's it, isn't it? It's next question time.
Yeah.
So I'm going to go first, and this question is which album is most relevant to the 5 years we've been doing the podcast. So when you're ready to time me, Sam.
Yeah, go for it.
Okay, so I actually found this question the hardest to answer because I was quite surprised that in the 5 years we've basically seen the world fall to pieces, we basically picked albums that were pretty upbeat and apolitical. So not a lot of it spoke to me of the world in recent times, but of the albums we did pick, it was the Jay-Z album that felt most relevant to the years we've been on air. I think it has the most political elements that chime with the times. But more than that, I think it fit into a trend that I've noticed in a lot of the music we've covered down the years. It feels like the last few years we've seen a lot of artists release albums that look to be their most personal, the most open albums that they've done, and albums that deal with their past and how that past has affected them, and particularly black artists talking about how racism has affected them. And I think 444 definitely does that. I also think there's a really positive move in hip hop in general, actually, over the last few years where we've seen less homophobia and more focus on equality in that area particularly. And I think the song Sam was talking about, Smile, is a really good example of that. I think Smile is potentially my favorite Jay-Z song that I've heard, and I don't know him as well as you guys. Further to that, I'd say that this album actually has some of my favorite Jay-Z songs. I like that Smile, the title song, Mercy Me, and Legacy. I thought were all great. But the other thing that made it relevant to the last 5 years for me was how, despite the attempts to be more personal and show more of an empathetic side, he still can't help himself from talking about money on nearly every song. Is that me? Is that
you just missed out.
I still had loads to say. I was about to go in on him for talking about money all the time, but I'll have to hold back on that. Yeah, all right. Okay, cool. So we're going to go to Sam next. Which one's the most relevant to the last 5 years? Go.
So I think I've misinterpreted this question entirely, which is great. An instant great
However you
thing
want to
go
interpret
off.
it.
So I've picked Nilufer Yanya because I feel like it's the most relevant to the 5 years that I've known the Picky Bastards podcast and have been engaging with it, because it, for many of the same reasons that Fran picked it earlier in that first question, this feels like one of those albums where there's something missing for me, but it seems like everyone else that I'm talking to across this website and podcast, that they get something from it that I'm not. I don't actively dislike it. It's probably my least favorite on the playlist, but
wow.
I don't actively dislike it at all. It's just the general mood that I seem to have towards this. I kind of started to go to more like indifference. The songs kind of blended together a bit more. I found her vocals slightly off-putting at times, where the production would end up going in quite a pop direction, and it didn't really feel like it gelled for me. And she has this kind of nonchalance, or like that she doesn't really care, or like she's kind of that. It's that indie attitude, isn't it? Which I feel like that this album captures that great, but it's not really my thing, which we've established many times. That's why I picked up this question. I enjoyed Paradise though. I feel like that's kind of more off kilter.
You're done. I wasn't even looking at my alarm then. So that wasn't a misinterpretation of the question. You can interpret these questions however you like. That's why I keep them very vague. However you want to see it. So that's all good. Okay, Mark, ready?
Cool.
Which album felt most relevant to you? Go.
So I went with Lizzo, because I love you. And I interpreted this question somewhere in between you guys. And so I think this is the most relevant album, especially to us as a group over the past 4 years, and to music in general, if we were to consider everything as a whole, because this is generally the way I feel like a lot of our tastes are evolving. A lot of us, I know of me, I know Fran's talked about this as well, like with pop music, there's much more of an acceptance within us to give this kind of music a try, and to actually genuinely love it. And then also like the other side is like the soul and the R&B aspects, also genres which are growing, getting bigger and more mainstream. And I think we're also pushing that way as well. And really, it's also just a fantastic album. It was also everywhere when it came out. It was massive, and so for that reason, it's also very relevant. And then, lastly, similar reasons to what were you talking about, Jay-Z? It's incredibly personal. She's doing pop music, but she's talking so much about herself and so much about the way it's very much through her own lens.
Okay.
Yeah.
You're done. So,
cool.
The answers there were Jay-Z, which we've spoken about, Nilufer Yanya, which we've spoken about, and Lizzo.
Yeah.
Sam, do you want to talk about Lizzo now?
I can talk about Lizzo. I love this album. I'm surprised you picked it for this question, actually, but I guess we all interpreted it differently. So it's probably just me then anyway. But yeah, I absolutely love this album. This is a pop classic to me of the last few years. And Lizzo is an absolute star. She's a star in this front to back. And it captures the energy that she has on stage. I feel like every single moment vocally, she just nails it. From the very start, it's like, okay, she can sing. She's singing for us. And then we're instantly into a completely different style of pop. And now she's making us kind of feel good about ourselves. I've so many interviews I've seen with her where she said, because this is like her fourth album or something. And
oh, really?
and it took so long for her to finally break through. And she'd been trying so many times. And her first few were like really heavy rap based. They weren't really pop. And she kind of, it's the idea that she's gone, I need to focus on making songs that make me feel good and make the audience feel good rather than showing off what I can do. And it feels like that's what this album does. Is it's like when she's there with Missy Elliott on tempo, you can tell she's loving every second, and we are as well. It's so infectious. That's a perfect word for it. Like, I feel like Heaven Help Me, Soulmate, all these songs just come alive when she performs them and when she sings it on this album. I was going to say, I've just said about the rap thing. I actually think that I kind of wish she did rap slightly more on the album. It's really interesting because they re-released this as like a deluxe edition when Truth Hurts became a massive hit, and that was her biggest song. And it feels like adding that on both ruins the end of the album for me when you add those bonus tracks on. So I prefer it without, but then also that gives me the rap bit that I'm kind of craving elsewhere. Okay. So I'm kind of conflicted on that. But yeah, I think Juice is an all-time classic. I've been obsessed with that song since the day it came out. And I feel like, no, I'm not a snack at all. Look, baby, I'm the whole damn meal. That kind of sums it up to me. She just owns it and completely kind of just bosses the album. And yeah, I really, really love it. I already did. And I'm glad that Matt picked this so I could listen to it again.
Yeah. I want to pick up on something you said with the, like, I'd listened to some of her previous work, and like it was very good hip hop, and like I was really into one of her songs, but it is just all like dance rap music, and it's great, but like to have this voice in your back pocket and then to be releasing music for years, like I think the album I've listened to is like from almost a decade ago at this point.
Yeah.
And then like halfway into your career, just like, oh, I can do this as well. It's ridiculous.
Right.
Fran, can you talk about it?
I'm not going to talk about Lizzo right now. That's all I'm going to say.
Oh, great.
So we'll move on to the final question.
I think almost statements about us growing towards a more inclusive environment.
I'm not saying a word. So we'll move on to the final question, which is, which album do you wish we still hadn't covered? I was trying to be very quiet and just sneak past that, but you've kind of may have given mine away. But we're going to start with Sam anyway. So, Sam, 90 seconds on which album you wish we still hadn't covered. Go.
Yeah, so I feel like I found this really hard because I actually don't dislike any of the albums. I actually really liked them all. So I'm not saying this is a bad album at all. It's actually a bit further up my list than the bottom. But I've picked Cardi B, Invasion of Privacy.
Okay.
I like it a lot, and I think she way exceeded expectations on this album when it came out. But I just think the conversations around it kind of blows it way out of proportion. It was at the time it was seen as like the landmark rap album of this era, and I feel like it's a great debut for someone who the expectations were incredibly low. But I can't put it. I just can't put this album next to some of the genuine classics that have come out in that time. I think there's really great songs on here, but I feel like we should. And the reason I picked it for this is because personally, I feel like Cardi B has improved since this album. I feel like some of the songs since, like WAP and Money and Up, and some of her features that she's done recently are kind of outclassing what happens on this album. And I personally feel like we should have waited until the next one. Maybe I'll be wrong and it'll be terrible. But that's kind of my feeling. I feel like she's got way more ahead of her than this album. I Like It is one of the best hits of the decade. That's undeniable. And that opening few seconds, I could listen to that literally on repeat.
You can listen to it, but you can't talk about it. You're done.
That's it.
Cool. Okay, Matt, which albums wish we still hadn't covered? Go.
I similar feelings to Sam. Like I liked everything on this playlist. But the one I liked the least, I guess, was Caroline Polachek with Pang. And like, so it's like there's a dark, broody pop music. There's even some like emo moments in there, but I found it was a little bare at times to really hold my interest. I wasn't super keen on her voice, but again, this might be an unfair juxtaposition when there are so many good voices on this list. Hers just doesn't hold kind of a candle to those guys. And I think the really big thing I struggle with this is like every album I had like several songs which I really, really gravitated towards. And in this album, there was a couple of songs I liked, but there wasn't a single song that I was like, hell yeah, I can't wait to get to that point. There's one about hurting my feelings at the end, which I thought was good.
But it's my feelings.
Yeah, that one. Yeah. But it's also like that was all the way at the end of the album, so you have to like get through 8 tracks and then you're there. And I just I was like kind of excited to listen to this album because like my wife really likes Chairlift, which is the band she's from. But after I listened to this, I was just like, maybe I'll just listen to Chairlift instead.
You just nailed 90 seconds. I can't find my stop button though. There it is. Okay. When you're ready to time me, Sam. I think my answer's pretty obvious now, but
yeah.
Go on, go.
But firstly, I should say, and I think you both just said it, I don't think there are any totally irredeemable albums on this list. I don't think there are any bad albums on this list. And even the one that I have chosen, I do like a few things about it. But in the end, while I agree with and respect a lot of what Lizzo's saying, it doesn't stop me from finding her voice and performance hard to cope with personally. She's a bit like nails on a chalkboard to me, especially when she squeals. I can't get on board with her voice. It is just irritating. Like a Girl is probably the best example of these two competing feelings about the album for me. It's like this really strong, admirable feminist message that's really to be respected. But she just rises and falls and squeaks all over the place, and I just can't do it. It's just really not for me. And that's a problem that exists throughout the album and makes even the moments that I like more than others still not anything I could return to. I think Jerome in general is a really good, funny, interesting song, but her voice is nails on a chalkboard. And I think the problem is really highlighted by the Missy Elliott feature because while there's a voice in here that I don't hate, I'm able to really enjoy the music and get really on board, and Missy Elliott's great on it. I think Better in Colour is another peak of the really impossible to enjoy voice. I don't know how any of you put up with it. I really don't. And that's all I have to say, really. It's just something that's entirely impossible to get past for me. As much as there's a lot to like about her, I definitely wish I hadn't heard it.
You just listed out absolute banger after absolute banger.
it's the voice. I'm not saying they're not bangers, but she hurts my eardrums.
You just don't like people being happy.
I mean, that might be part of it, but it is just I value my eardrums. That's what I'm going to say.
Yeah.
Okay, so we talked about Lizzo. You guys have both spoken about already. Caroline Polachek. Should we go there? Shall I talk about Caroline Polachek? So
go for it.
I can kind of get what Matt's saying. I have some slightly different. I think I feel similarly, but in a different way, if that makes any sense. Because I think this album starts incredibly well. I think every time I put this album back on, I would be like, oh, I didn't think I liked it that much last time I heard it, but this is great. I think The Gate is really good, and then every song from that to I Give Up is really, really good. I think that it starts with really interesting, creative pop songs with a lot of power. I think they're straightforward in a lot of ways, but they do a lot of interesting things. I think the bass on New Normal is a really good example of what I'm talking about. It's just odd enough and it stands out enough to make the song sort of different and to elevate it. That's one of my favourite songs here. I really like Pang as well, the title song. But every time I get to Look at Me Now, I remember that this album totally falls off a cliff after the first 5 songs. I think it just becomes boring ballad after boring ballad at that part. I think Insomnia, the really, really poor song Ocean of Tears, Hey Big Eyes, Go As a Dream, that's just a really soporific run of songs. I think it picks up a little bit towards the end with Caroline Shut Up and So Hot You're Hurting My Feelings, but I've never been able to decide whether I like them or find them irritating. I'm not sure. The whole Caroline telling herself to shut up thing irritates me a little bit, I've got to be honest. And then it ends quite boringly as well. So for me, it felt like a decent EP with a lot of rubbish tacked on afterwards. And the more I listened to it, the more I felt that even those songs that I liked at the beginning were kind of like a lesser version of Christine and the Queens. So I think anytime I want to listen to this kind of music, I'll just listen to Christine and the Queens. And also the fact that, Matt, you don't really like Christine and the Queens, it makes sense to me that you don't like this album as well. But I bet Sam really likes it. That's my guess that I'm going to make.
Okay.
Now.
Well, can I shatter your illusions?
Yes.
Well, actually, you already know. I said I like all of the albums on this list, so that's ruined that. But yeah, no. So I picked this because you've mentioned Christine and the Queens. She's done multiple songs with Christine and the Queens.
Oh, really?
With Charlie XCX on various things, and so I know her voice. And to me, I found it interesting that you picked out her voice as the thing you didn't like, Matt, because to me that is her best asset and that her most unique asset, because she sounds completely otherworldly. She doesn't sound like anyone else. So when she appears on someone else's song, I go, oh, I recognize that voice. So I always wanted to get back to this. I think I listened to it once when it came out and there was kind of a bit of buzz around it, but never went back. And I'm glad I did, because I feel like really getting into it this time, I was able to kind of get through it. I find it interesting what both of you were saying about the split of the album, because I think it's the difference between kind of pop fans and non-pop fans. The pop fans, it takes ages for this album to finally get to some songs that are immediate, which are Caroline Shut Up and So Hot You Hurting My Feelings. They are the poppiest, straightforward pop moments on the record. And I feel like that was all I remembered from it the first time I would go through. But it's the layers and everything else that I found really interesting. And as it went, I started to really, really enjoy the rest of the songs. I really like Ocean of Tears and Hey Big Eyes. I think Pang is really good. Bear with me when I've written down that she reminds me of Enya. I don't mean this as a complete criticism, but the way that she does that thing with her voice where she kind of like inflects up and down and like it's really unique, and it gives, but it's also in the way that the electronic sounds are used for like this atmospheric quality where they like surround her voice. It makes like the electronic sounds sound natural, which I feel like Enya was doing in her like new age stuff in like the 90s. But I feel like that's what makes her so interesting. I can see why this is quite a divisive album between people, and it isn't immediate, and it took a lot to get into it. And I still don't know if I would be like put this next to that Christina and the Queen's album, either of hers, or even some other kind of the lesser mainstream pop records. But I feel like she's an interesting artist that I'm glad I went back into, because whatever she does next, I'm going to be interested in.
Do you see my point about her sounding like a lesser version of Christine the Queen's? Though, do you see that? Is there a similarity?
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah.
The style and there's if it when it says like artists similar to, like they're right next to each other. Like they just had a song with Charlie XCX, both of them, that was one of my favorite songs from last year. Exactly the same thing, but I feel like Christine just has a lot more to say, a lot more interesting, and also knows the pop side of it a bit more, so it's way more instantly catchy, whereas this is like you really have to dive into it. And I found this hard to recommend to pop fans, and then it's too pop for a lot of the indie people. And so it's kind of this weird middle ground, and that's why I feel like your two responses make sense.
The opposite responses, but the similar feelings.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Interesting.
Yeah, that's funny.
Okay, so cool. Cardi B, Matt.
I can talk about Cardi B. I agree. It's actually really interesting to talk about Cardi B in this context, because we were talking about doing Cardi B for my first month on the playlist.
Oh, really?
Yeah. And so the first month where I got to choose the music, which would have been my second podcast. And so revisiting it, because we chose something else instead, it has been it's been like a nice closure of that almost. But yeah, like I like this album. I think it is uneven, kind of like what Sam was saying. It goes pretty hard in certain sections. I really like the opening track, for example, like for it to be so like bare, and it's just like, oh, I'm rapping. You can see me rapping, and I'm pretty good at it. I think it's a pretty good tone to set for like your debut. So she can just kind of flex a little bit. But like some of the other parts of the album are just like a bit hit or miss. It's super long. It's a bit too long. And then when you talk about it, like Sam was saying, this was huge. And like other albums that year, like No Name with Room 25, I think it's way, way better. Or even like Tierra Whack with Whack World, which was kind of really interesting style of album, was also way, way better. And I'd be like, so for this to be the one that's the new defining hip hop album, really it just doesn't work for me. But that said, like it's very fun. It's full of her charisma, which she has so much of. It's throughout this pandemic, she's been a feature of like, she does PSAs and stuff. So she's been like, through the past couple of years, she's been in our homes telling us what to do. So it's like I have a lot of affection for her as an artist and as a person. But yeah, like Sam says, this is just a little overrated.
I was going to ask you specifically about it feels like Cardi B is successful over here, but isn't in the same level as she is over in America. Does it feel like she's kind of inescapable over the past 5 years since this?
I would say to a certain extent, yeah, but it's also hard to judge because she's so identifies with New York and specifically the Bronx, and so anything where it's like, oh, there's a celebrity who's from the Bronx, or someone from the community who's talking, it's often her. Especially like political endorsements, all of that stuff. Cardi B will come out. Yeah. Yeah. I
don't know all this stuff about her. This is madness to me listening to this conversation, because I don't know anything really about her. So it's madness to hear that she's doing all this stuff.
Well, she's just super engaged in the community. And then also like she's had a lot of friction with other stars. And so she's in the media for those reasons as well. I even watched a movie the other day and it had both her and Lizzo in it.
Okay.
So yeah, she is everywhere. Everywhere I look.
So it's kind of, this is all kind of, I mean, I'll jump in now. It's all kind of fascinating to me because I picked this album kind of, for me, it's always seemed like a bit of a joke. I didn't know that it was so respected. I think my experience of this album is as part of my job, the year this came out, I was sort of going away on these residential weekends with the teenagers I was working with and taking them to do like activity weekends. And they were all just permanently rapping Cardi B lines in my face. And so maybe that's where my assumption that it was all a bit of a joke came from, because I didn't think, I'd never taken it seriously as an album. So I picked this in a way because I thought I was going to get the piss to take the piss out of something popular and moan about it for a little bit. That's why I picked it for this episode. But actually, in the end, I did have quite a lot of fun with this album. It's much, much better than I thought it was going to be. Her flow certainly isn't the best I've heard or anything, which that's kind of why it surprises me that you're saying it's considered to be such a big album in there. I thought it was like a pop album that, it has got some, it is obviously a hip hop album, but I didn't think it was taken that seriously as a hip hop album. But her flow's not terrible, and I think she makes up for that lack of flow with her personality and the performance she puts in. She's definitely captivating, and I think it goes hard at times. This album, which I again wasn't really expecting. It starts really relentlessly with like Get Up 10, Drip, Bickenhead, and Bodak Yellow. I think they're all decent, sort of hard hitting songs. And I also found I liked some of the more personal, sort of slower songs too. I liked Be Careful. I liked Ring, and I liked Through Your Phone, even though this is why I was laughing about her being this political figure in some ways, because Through Your Phone makes her sound very questionable as a human. But she says some very questionable things throughout, really. But I like that she takes ownership of that, which is another thing you said. I like that she takes ownership of who she is, and she's an interesting character. And a lot of good hip hop has done that down the years, sort of taken ownership of elements of their personality that other people might find strange to them because it's not what they're used to. So yeah, I was pretty impressed with it. Really, it's not an album I'm in love with, and I don't know if I'll go back to it. But it was a much more involving listen than I expected it to be. So yeah, I was relatively impressed, but still very shocked that she's quite such a. She just seems like someone that's a bit of a reality star to me. But I've obviously missed out.
Well, she was. That was where she originally came from.
Yeah,
she was on one of those kind of. It was some New York show. I can't remember what it was.
Okay.
But that was her breakthrough, and then Bodak Yellow ended up becoming the first female hip hop #1 single.
Wow. Okay.
Like solo single without anyone else on it. I mean, she's had like 5
no Lauryn Hill
since then.
No, Lauryn Hill's have been #1.
Or maybe the first since then. I can't remember. Okay. I can't remember. Don't quote me. Don't come for me, Cardi B stands.
You are on a podcast, so you will be quoted.
It is the first. Yeah, I read that. It's the first one since Lauryn Hill in 1998.
Okay.
So it's been 20 years since like a rap album, and a female rap album.
Interesting. Okay. Well, we've got through all the questions now. We spoke about all of the answers to that last question, haven't we? So we've just got 2 albums left. We've got actually 2 albums that me and Sam picked as ones that we knew well, I think. So Sam, do you want to start with Rosalia? And do you want to pronounce the title for us all?
Rosalia.
Rosalia.
That's how it.
I didn't know that. I've said that the whole time until just now when I've just said it wrong. So
on her things, I've been asking everyone to listen to this album ever since I first heard it. And knowing that it is not going to be for everyone, it is. But for me, this has been one of the most exciting albums of the last 5 years. It's like you can say it's genre hopping, but I don't think it is. It's straight up a flamenco album, but it just borrows elements from other genres, from hip hop and pop and kind of R&B music. But it's so distinctively flamenco throughout that. It's just so interesting and it stands out so much. I feel like especially in a world where we've got Latin music is so popular, but it's all kind of like reggaeton music, and it all kind of doesn't all sound the same, but that rhythm is kind of what is in all of these big songs. So this is really kind of a really interesting, different take on it from someone who is Spanish. They're not like from Spain. So yeah, I feel like Manamente sets it up perfectly. The hand claps and the castanet sounds mixed with the hip hop production. I saw her perform this on Jules Holland, and that's what made me instantly go and get her album. And then the energy as she like dances her voice around kind of Spanish guitar lines on Pienso en tu mirar and Di mi nombre. Those two songs are outstanding on this and real highlights. And I find it interesting. It's obviously we're listening to this and it's hard to know what she's singing about. You two clearly understand Spanish more than me, which is not at all. But this album is a concept album based on a 13th century romance novel called Flamenca. So I was translating some of the lyrics from, because I've got this on vinyl and it comes with like the lyric sheet, and it's like there's drama in these songs, like people dying and like kind of the heartbreak and the emotion in the lyrics is it gives, but you hear it in her voice when she's performing. There's a song Que nos sagla la luna, and it's just such a thrill when she's singing, and you hear so much emotion in there, even though I don't know what she's saying, but it's everything is so larger than life and dramatic, and I just love it. I think she's like the most exciting and engaging performer that has like emerged in the music in a long time for me. So I really wanted to do this on the podcast for a long time, or at least kind of share it with people just to see what you think. Because you guys might hate this, you might love it. I have genuinely no idea. So yeah.
Who do you want to go to first?
You go, Fran. Go on.
Yeah. Look, I don't think it's going to surprise you massively to hear I don't have a lot to say about this album, but it's not because I dislike it. I don't dislike it. I think it's really quite pretty. I think it's got a lot of interesting elements, and she's very talented. Like you've just talked about, she comes across as a star on this album, and you can see that. But the reality is, the album kind of washes over me. It doesn't leave me with an awful lot to cling to, just because it, unlike the Ibibio Sound Machine album, which the words didn't feel important to me, even though it sounds like from what Matt's told us they might well be more interesting than I thought. I wanted to know what she was saying on this album because it felt so emotional, and I didn't know what she was saying, so it kind of left me not that interested. And now that you tell me what the album is about, I'm kind of glad that I don't know what she's talking, because if it's about some flamenco novel, then probably I wouldn't have been as interested as I thought I might be. I think there's not enough in the music that interests me personally for me to love the album without understanding what she's saying, if that makes sense. But I think that's all a me problem, not an album problem. I do definitely think it's a good album and an interesting album, and I can understand why people love it, but it just didn't stick with me really. Yeah, which is probably exactly what you thought was going to be my response, I would imagine. But yeah,
it's I feel like it's a tough one. It's hard to gauge what people. I just want people to hear it, because I do think that 5 years from now she's going to be one of the biggest stars in the world. I mean, she already is pretty huge.
She's got a new album coming out, hasn't she, this year?
Yeah.
What did you think, Matt?
Well, I knew this album really well. I love it.
Oh, did you?
Yeah. I like I heard this a while ago, and as soon as I heard like the flamenco stylings, I was super enthused. I have a weird, like, for someone from southern England, I have a lot of ties to Spain because my grandparents grew up there. Oh, my grandparents didn't grow up there. I visited my grandparents when I was growing up, and they both lived there. And then I had a ex-girlfriend who was from Spain, and her dad would always sing flamenco when I went there. So like, I know, like, have experienced a lot of flamenco, and so it was really interesting to hear like a modern take on it, mixed with this kind of like R&B stylings. But like Sam said, it's like flamenco really at the core. I would be really curious to talk to someone who's into traditional flamenco and see what they thought of this album.
Yeah.
But I just, it's so interesting the way it's put together, and it's so much like fun, and there's so much vitality in it. While still, it's like really interesting to hear such a classical style be like renovated in this way. And then like the way it's become also like commercially successful it's been really interesting to see, because it is such a like almost like you say a high concept album. It's so kind of weird and out there and experimental, but then it because of songs like Despacito and things like that, like Latin music is so much more palatable these days for people that it can make that impact and do something more interesting than Despacito, which was just like, this is a pop song. So yeah, and like the influence of this album already I can see, because I've heard like flamenco beats and other stuff, and like Latin music now isn't just reggaeton. which is great, because that's a very specific beat and it's in everything. And so I can't wait for the next album. It's one of the albums I'm most looking forward to. And like you say, she could potentially she could change pop music in a really interesting way, which is exciting.
Well, there you go. Okay, last album is Ibeyi's Ash. I'll start us off, as it was one I picked for the playlist. So this was the one, like we said at the start, we each picked one or two that we wanted to sort of share. This was the one that I wanted to share. So obviously I'm a big fan of it. I didn't actually know their music. I didn't know this album when it came out. I discovered them sort of early in the first lockdown, when I was just randomly listening to all sorts of stuff. And I've been really into them since then. I think they really successfully meld a whole host of genres together. So much so that the album ends up kind of feeling genreless to me. I wouldn't be able to tie it down to an exact genre. It feels very original. I think there's a really effortless way in which their voices work together. Their harmonies add this intense level of emotion to what are already sort of intensely emotional songs. I think I might have chosen this as the one that's most relevant to the last 5 years if I hadn't already known so much about it. But it kind of felt like cheating for me to pick it, because I know the stories behind some of the songs. So I know that Deathless, for example, was written following an incident in which one of the twins was subject to racist incidents with a police officer, which is obviously hugely familiar in the context of what we've been seeing in society while we've been doing this podcast. But I do wonder, and I'm quite interested to hear from you two, whether the relevance of that was as obvious to someone who's a newcomer to the album. Like, does that song come across that it's about that? Maybe we'll get to that in a minute. But because the reason I wonder about that is one of the things I really like about Ibeyi is how their messaging is often quite subtle. I think a lot of these songs can just be heard for the beauty and the construction of the songs before you even think about what they're saying. I think obviously there's an exception to that with No Man Is Big Enough for My Arms, which the subtleties totally dropped with. There's all the excerpts from the Michelle Obama speech. But I think that song sort of serves as the center of the album, sort of providing this context to a sort of genreless album that drifts and changes all over the place. So it feels like a really free, creative album to me. But at the same time, you know that like a lot of work's gone into every second of it. I just think it's a really accomplished, really interesting album. So yeah, I'd be interested to hear what either of you thought. We'll go to you first, Matt, because I just decided that randomly.
Sure. Sorry. Yeah.
I made you cough.
Like I said, I do like this album. I don't think I loved it, but I do think I agree with a lot of what you was kind of saying. Like there's a lot to get from it, and like you say, like I think to go into like what you're talking about with like the relevance to the past 5 years, I think there's a tone that's interesting, and I could be completely off base here, but the tone that I got from this is like the one of defiance and perseverance as opposed to anger. And I feel like the tone in modern discourse about these things that we're talking about, like racial injustice and things like that, has shifted a little bit towards anger and fighting back against the system. And so it feels like an album from 5 years ago because of that. but I don't think it's necessarily a detriment to it. And I think you need both those things.
It's interesting, actually. I'll just cut in for a second because it's interesting. Well, I was rereading an article about this just before we recorded, and they were talking about how a lot of what they're trying to say in both their albums so far is it's related to sort of stuff from the civil rights era that they grew up talking to their parents about. So that's absolutely right, Mike. Like the defiance thing. Yeah. I think Deathless is the particular example of that. Deathless is about as a race of people, we keep going despite all of these things. So I think, that's a very good read.
Occasionally it happens. But I think you also touched like, you're right. The center point is no man is big enough for your arms. It's a perfect example of how to use a sample effectively, I think. Some people get it so wrong, but this is really done effectively. The way it's layered in, and then they go to their like harmonies and then back to Michelle Obama is really, really effective to have like this touchstone. I think if I'm going to get really like picky about this, the structure of the album's a little weird because it does feel like it's building up to something towards the end. You have this kind of build to something at the beginning, and then it feels like it's building something to the end. And then there's like this 8-minute track that feels like it's supposed to be the payoff, and it's not. But like that's me getting really, really picky.
You're allowed to be picky. It is picky bastards.
Yeah, so, exactly. Yeah. But that shouldn't deter anyone from listening.
Cool. Sam?
Yeah, so I'm not going to be picky. I really enjoyed this. This was a close second for my favorite new discovery.
Oh, cool.
I really love the way that their voices blend together. That's what keeps you coming back to this. Is their voices together and the harmonies that they have, and the times when they sing over the top of each other in like a layered way through the song. I feel like there's really stark moments on the album, like Waves, where it's really raw, and it really cut through a lot of the louder records that we had on this playlist. And so I really enjoyed this section for that. But then I liked that they have such dynamic and interesting voices, but they're not afraid to use it in a different way. So there was lots of vocoder on this album, which I really like because it really adds to the kind of deep emotion that they're trying to get across. I found a lot of links between this record and thinking back to like 808s and Heartbreak, in terms of the use of the drums and alongside like a vocoder. Obviously that's an album I know really, really well, so that was just a link for me. But it captures that same kind of level of kind of like open space, just with this like haunting voice. I personally didn't think that the Michelle Obama speech works as well as it probably feels like it's supposed to. I didn't have that same moment of this is the peak of this album and then we're back again. On first listen, I feel like it works quite well, and then as time went on, I just sort of started getting a bit, I'd rather they be singing. So I don't know. And I didn't get the same level of kind of the political feeling on some of the other tracks. I don't know whether that was just ignorance from not listening properly, or in the same way.
I think it is very subtle, though. I think it is purposely subtle. It's not like, which is what I like about it. It's not laying it on too thick. Like, it's a sort of personal experience of the political, I think, which I like about it. And I don't think that's the main thing to take away from it. Sometimes I think you're getting a lot from it when it doesn't have to be.
I really, really enjoyed it. I think the opener is really beautiful, and I really enjoyed When Will I Learn as well. I thought it's just really a really interesting album, and I'm glad we've listened to it. This came out quite a while ago. Are they planning a new album?
So they've had a single come out in December, which features that the guy who won he did pretty well in the BBC Sounds of 2020, the Pow Pow Salute. He features on the song, doing what I always do. I've not listened to it because I'm presuming it's meaning there's an album coming. So I'm going to hold off listening to it so I can hear it on the album. So I can't tell you whether it's good or not. But there is a new single. If you like them, Sam, you should also hear the debut album, which is self-titled.
I haven't gone to it yet because I wanted to wait until we'd done this, but I'm definitely going to.
It's really hard to separate which of the albums is better, actually, if I'm being honest. I think there's things you might like, and you might like more about that one, Matt, because in a way it's less... it has less of the sort of drifting in and out. It's a bit more cohesive, I think. But yeah, I'm really glad you enjoyed it. Yeah, that's cool. Great album. Yeah. Okay, that's it. We have come to the end of the albums we should have covered but didn't. We've now covered them. So we've now covered all the albums that we should cover ever.
Sure.
It was quite hard for us to come up for a list of 9, though, wasn't it?
Yeah.
It was quite hard to find a list that either we hadn't been vocal about in some way or hadn't already covered. So I think we did well. I think it was... Well, we may as well talk about the list. It was a really good list, I thought. As you would expect this list to be. It was really good. A lot of interesting stuff. The only thing I would say, the only thing that stood out to me was it was quite gentle in a way. Like, there was nothing really hard hitting, I didn't think. I would have maybe liked one frantic guitar album with lots of shouting that Sam would have hated.
No,
that was probably
this was the best playlist that has ever happened, and we will live on forever as a. Yeah, this was great. There wasn't a single thing I didn't like. But yeah, that's not hard. It's not a surprise, really. I don't think.
Because your favorite. So we're going into this. Was the Rosalia album your favorite, and is it still your favorite?
That and Jay-Z. Between them, really. Like, yeah, that's obviously still my favorite, those two, because I absolutely love them. But yeah, I found it interesting because I actually thought I was going to enjoy the Carolyn Polachek more than some of the others. So it was an interesting switch around, really. But I thought it was really, really great list, and everyone should listen to all of these albums.
Definitely.
For sure.
Yeah, because I think even the ones like I didn't expect to enjoy a couple of them, Ibibio Sound Machine particularly, and I really did enjoy that. So yeah, I think, and also I think maybe, I mean, Ash was obviously my favourite going in, but Bartees Strange pushes it pretty close now, which is a nice thing to happen. So yeah, great list. What about you, Matt? It's just a good list, isn't it? There's not much to say.
I agree. It would have been nice to have something with a bit more bite, just to complement everything, add a bit more diversity to the list. But like I said, we kind of over-index for that anyway. So there's going to be less out there that we haven't heard as a group. I suppose
part of that might be that it started with the Cardi B as well, didn't it? For us, the playlist started with the Cardi B, which is probably one of the more aggressive albums, and it ended with the Jay-Z. So it's kind of had the two. It was bookended by the two slightly more aggressive albums, maybe.
Yeah, exactly. So, but everyone, like Sam says, everyone should listen to all of them because they were all great. So if you haven't listened to one, it's well worth your time.
And then Nilufer Yanya is your favourite on this list, is it?
I don't know. I find it hard to pick favourites. I'm not even sure if it was my favourite going into this.
Okay.
I just wanted to talk about it.
Fair enough.
Maybe Rosalia. I don't know. Maybe Jay-Z.
All right. Well, that was very clear. Thanks, Matt. All right. Yeah. Should we move on to talk about next time then?
Sure.
I think next time is going to be Sam's first hosting job since you joined us. So
yeah, God help us all.
How are you feeling about that?
Yeah, it'd be fine.
Yeah.
Yeah. As long as there's a mute button, isn't there, that I can press? Is there not?
No mute button. I'm trying to think of a way if I can make you feel really nervous about it.
You can just disconnect the call, disconnect everyone, and you can
just
do voices
for an hour by myself.
Do our voices, pretend to be us, and then you can just do the whole podcast.
I would listen to that. I would love to listen to an hour of Sam pretending to be us. That would be good.
So for a classic, I have picked Aretha Franklin. I've Never Loved a Man the Way I Love You. And I am doing a Why I Love of Lady Gaga.
Lady Gaga. It's got to be our poppiest Why I Love so far.
Yes.
Yeah, I feel like you're coming out pretty strong for a first set.
Have to. Got to go with it.
He's coming for us with the pop. It's going to become the pop podcast by episode 75. It'll be entirely pop albums. What about you, Matt? What you got?
So I picked Orlando Weeks, his new album. So he's from the Maccabees, and here the album title is Hop Up, and also the album Visions by Red Vox.
Brilliant. And I am going with The Overload by Yard Act and FK Twigs's not an album but a mixtape, Capri Songs, that is actually an album, not a mixtape. But we'll see. We'll talk about that more next time.
I'm very excited about this list.
Yeah, it looks a good one. It looks a good one. I won't say how my feelings about Lady Gaga are at this point. I could be blown away. Who knows? Who knows?
You've got a month to change your opinion.
Yeah. Well, Sam sent the list over that he's made earlier, and I noticed that the 2 songs I know and don't like are not on it. So maybe there's a whole world of
It's almost
goodness.
Intentional.
Okay. Just didn't want to hear me moan about them again. Right, we'll see you all next time, everyone.
Yeah,
Thanks for listening.
Bye.
Bye-bye.